everybody. Welcome to tonight's Open Rooms, which is Open Rooms 12. And this conversation is taking part as part of Independence Biennial, which is running this year between the 18th of March and the 6th of June. So my name is Sorha Boyle and I work at OpenAI Gallery as part of managing the responsive programme. And tonight we're joined by Independence Festival Director Patrick Kirk-Smith and the three artists who are exhibiting on the Digital Window Gallery at OpenAI Gallery over the course of the festival, Sam Venables, Faye Yuen and Montse Mosquera. So Independence Biennial exists to celebrate the region's creative life and cast a fresh perspective on how people in Merseyside see, make and use art. For the first time, the focus of the festival sits at an intersection between digital and analog programming, between physical and online connectedness, and between text and image. So tonight we're going to chat with the artists for about 40 minutes and show some of the work that has formed each artist's exhibition. We'll also have time to answer questions. So if you have any questions for our speaker, you can put them in the chat on the Twitch stream or on Discord. And then we'll also be on Discord for about 20 minutes after the talk. So you can join us there afterwards. So we'll do some introductions just to kick things off. And I wondered, Patrick, would you like to start and just tell us a bit about yourself and this year's festival?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Patrick. I run the Independence Biennial and Art in Liverpool. This year's festival is it's not necessarily focused around a theme, but it is there to serve a rough purpose of sharing the work of artists as it unfolds and the background to it, and not necessarily just focusing on the finished product. Part of that is surveys and reports from the Artist Studio Network Liverpool and a collaborative report with Artists Union England, all of which are available on the website, along with about probably 4 days solid worth of reading material by 4 artist hosts if you've got massive amounts of time to read 5 of us rambling and stumbling through various ideas.
I think the website is independencebiennial.com, so you can.
That's a good point.
And you can also each artist has an individual page, so you can read up on their work there as well.
Yep.
Do you want to go next?
Yep. So I will share my screen.
Oh, just to introduce yourself first.
Oh, sorry. Well, getting ahead of myself. Stop sharing. Sorry. Yeah, so I'm Sam Venables. I am an artist. I am also a visual merchandiser. I'm originally from Ellesmere Port. I've currently lived all over the UK, Liverpool, Glasgow, Newcastle, London, but I currently live in York. But yeah, I'm originally from, and I lived in Liverpool for a number of years as well.
Thank you. And Faye?
So I, my background has always been quite heavily photographic, I guess. I did my BA in China in photography, and then I moved to London for my master. I did it at Royal College of Art. So after that, I went to Slade to do a PhD, which is in fine art program, but essentially, I mean, my practice has always been quite photographic. So, and also I make publications, books, small objects, installations, as well as moving images, sound recording. Yeah, and I teach occasionally as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And Montse?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Montse. I'm a graphic designer. I graduated last year in the John Moores University. I'm from Ecuador. I was raised in Spain and I've been living in England for the last 4 years. I have a hobby for photography and but I mostly worked in graphic design.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I thought we'd kick things off with you, Sam, since you kind of exhibited first on the Digital Window Gallery. So you exhibited between 18th of March and 11th of April with your video work Bonanza, which is a collection of your images that you've taken over the years that have influenced your sculptural work. So yeah, feel free to share your screen as you're talking, Sam.
Can you see it?
We can, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'm Sam. Obviously, I've already introduced myself. I work as a visual merchandiser. Oh, I'll just turn that off. Sorry. For a big jeans company, Levi's Jeans, and I've worked there for a number of years, 13 years actually, alongside being an artist. And I think I wanted to touch on that because my work that I do day to day, Monday to Friday, kind of really does influence the artwork that I make. So I saw a call out that OpenEye put out to display my art, display your photographs or artwork in the Digital Window Gallery, and I thought it was really like a perfect opportunity for me to show some photographs that I've taken over the past 10 years. And as an artist, I don't normally show photography as my artwork, but I've realized over time that it really does influence the artwork that I make. So you can see rolling on screen the video that I made for the Digital Window Gallery, and it's really just a combination of photographs made into a film looping of influence that influences my sculptural practice, and these have all been taken over the past 10 years.
Thank you. And yeah, so I was interested because you look a lot at the idea of like fandom and collection and why people are drawn to particular things and objects, and you can see that in your collection of photos and also in your sculptural work. But I was interested in how you like became interested in that subject. Do you collect things yourself?
Sure. So I do collect things. I'm a bit of a kleptomaniac. I own a lot of stuff, but I'm also I don't collect really anything in particular. And photography is one of those things that I do collect, and things that influence me. I'm really into sign writing and display, and that's why you can see on the pictures on screen like really do influence my work. In terms of collection, I've made some artworks that have really very much been influenced through collectors basically. So I can just skip to this slide. So this work was made after visiting a lady who collects bubblegum in near Atlanta, and she basically inherited a collection when she was younger of different packets of bubblegum, and built on this throughout her life. She's now in her 80s. And I went to visit, along with one of my pals, I went to visit her collection. She built like a custom building, and she really like influenced me in terms of her dedication to collection. And she had thousands and thousands of bubblegum designs and wrappers and pieces, and they were all displayed very particularly in cases. But the UK section, the England section, was very poor. So it consisted of Wrigley's extra packets that someone had picked up from an airport, So when I got back to the UK, I went round every pound shop and corner shop and collected lots of different bubblegum and sent them over to her, and got a bit of a rapport with her and started writing each other letters. And I continue to send her rare bubblegum that I found that I haven't found already in the UK. And yeah, this the words thank you "you're in my heart" were actually a message that was actually at the ending of one of her letters to me. So I wanted to make that into a 5-foot high bubblegum so I could take a picture of it and send it to her, basically. So yeah, collection is a huge influence in my practice.
What does it? What role does photography play in that then? You know, in relation to Bonanza, but also just generally, is there a
Sure.
difference in how you work with photography?
Yeah, so I think with photography, it's all about like the excitement of finding something real niche and documenting it. Or even when I was in kind of her museum, so to speak, I was, you know, constantly taking photos for reference. All material that I would use to you know, to base my practice on. Like the photo to the right was actually off an old Monster Munch packet, and it was like they were giving away spokes for bikes in the like early 90s that people could collect, and it that was all linked to a different show about a car that I used to own, and about the story of a car. But yeah, it was really kind of relevant to make this light box to do with the story for that show. But it's all for the photography that I do, and the photographs that I take are always kind of real reference points for me to make the more sculptural works, or yeah, the more the painted works later on. Yeah.
Do you see? Sorry, do you see Bonanza as kind of or the way it's presented now, you know, with Open Eye, as a kind of stepping stone to more sculptural work in the future?
Yeah, because I've never really exhibited any photography as part of my practice, I think it's a real kind of point in my artistic kind of career, so to speak, that it's really kind of dawned on me of how important that is, and they're photographing these everyday occurrences and things that are really important, like maybe, you know, a sign in a shop, or a pile of rubbish in the street, or a note in a window, and how they kind of reflect our cultural discourse, actually, at you know, at a snapshot, at a moment in time that could be just forgotten. So yeah, I think taking those snapshots and keeping them and treasuring them and using them to make work later on is a really kind of cultural importance, I feel, of a certain state of time or politics, or yeah, anything like that.
I love, yeah, you used a phrase kind of like social heritage, I think, in your artist statement, and also the idea of unofficial museums. So what people choose to display in their windows, what's valuable, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I wanted to ask you a bit about the crossover between like your profession as a visual merchandiser and your art practice, both in the methods of displaying your work and this idea of communicating what's valuable.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll go ahead. I was just going to mention that for anyone that didn't know, the work is being shown on the Digital Window Gallery, which is like an outdoor public realm kind of digital window, and it's being physically shown through a window, which is very apt for your work, Sam. So yeah, I wondered if you could just talk a bit more about your work as a visual merchandiser and the significance of the window and the public space in your work as well.
It is, it massively is. I mean, like I've always been interested in how to kind of sell things, I suppose, that gaze of people looking through a window and the want for things. And my family have a history of like being market traders and selling antiques, and me, my brother, sister used to be in Ellesmere Port Market in the morning, setting up the stall and having a real interest in how things look on a display. And I'm always really interested in how and why people are drawn into windows, and how you get people's attention in windows. And actually that is my day-to-day job of trying to get people's attention, and it's hard because there's that much noise on the high street. People are just kind of, it's ignored, so it is real hard. And I did this work that I made, this work I made, Do Don't, in Airspace Gallery in Stoke-on-Trent in 2017. That was just kind of like, that was playing with that idea of the window and the instruction of what to buy, or do buy it or don't buy it, or it's confusing. And obviously, I've mentioned that I'm interested in sign painting as well. So yeah, combining these two kind of elements in history, I made this window, and the confusion of not knowing what to do when you see a window, to buy or not to buy. So yeah, so applying directly to OpenEye to display my work in a window was the main reason why I applied, because of my fascination with windows, really.
Sam, you mentioned kind of slogans and pulling people in, and then in your answer to the last question as well about how things is how things as simple as a note in a window can display, I think, a cultural heritage or a cultural moment. What do you think? Is it the visual language or the language itself? Is it, which part of that is the more important part? Is it the words that are presented, or is it the way they're presented?
I think probably both, because I'm always interested in like text and like font, or like text style, or the way someone would lay things out. But also obviously the words themselves are important, and how they can really kind of be varied dependent on where what area you're in. Like I lived in Glasgow for 5 years, and the signs in shop windows in Glasgow are a lot different than the signs in shop windows in London, maybe because of the dialect and the way that people talk. So yeah, no, I find that really very interesting, and I think it's really important to document that, and I use it in my practice. I use it a lot in my practice. Words that people say that have different meanings. Like I did a show in London a few years back in 2016, and the title was slummy. And slummy is very like, I would say it was probably like a Scouse word for like pocket change. But people outside of that area, I found personally, didn't really know of that word, and I find that really interesting and really important part of cultural heritage, like to keep and document those kind of sayings and words.
Yeah, I'm going to look more into that kind of dialect. I'm intrigued, because I don't know, should I have heard the word slummy as part of Scouse dialect? I've not.
I don't know, maybe, I don't know. It depends where you're from, Patrick.
But yeah, I don't know. No, yeah, I think I'm probably going to spend my night looking into more obscure bits of Scouse dialect now.
There's a good one. A friend of mine always said, and I'd never heard of it growing up as a kid, but he'd always say, you got your eye wiped, and I'd be like, I don't know what that means, getting your eye wiped. What does that mean? And do you know what it means?
No,
it means like you've seen your arse, like something's not really gone your way, so you've got your eye wiped. I've never heard that before, but he swore it was a thing, and there was a bit of like an argument about if that actually was a was a real kind of phrase. Who knows?
It's amazing.
Okay.
Hearing all the stories behind the kind of slogans you use, because a lot of them are kind of like not known to me, I guess. And then yeah, hearing the story behind the thank you in my heart and all that, and also how like word of mouth is really like a massive thing in your work, finding out about stuff where if it's like the chewing gum collector through word of mouth, or is it Eagle and the Child, which is about documenting McDonald's.
Yeah, so yeah, I made it took me a long time, like a couple of years. It's actually there's been various guises of this film. It's called Eagle and Child, and basically I came across it when I moved to London originally, because I moved to London for work, and obviously I don't live there anymore, but driving around London, I realized that actually some of the there's a lot of McDonald's restaurants that were in buildings that were probably of quite importance, town halls, libraries, old pubs, so of social importance as well in that area, and they'd been converted into McDonald's restaurants, which I thought was pretty sad. And then I started to research all of the McDonald's restaurants around London, and found out that there were a lot of in old buildings that had been changed usage, kept the outside very similar to how they were originally built, but the inside just looked like a generic McDonald's restaurant, which is really interesting to me. But I'm still, it's kind of that whole like Wetherspoon story, isn't it? Like you don't know, is it a good thing that the corporation has saved the building from becoming into a derelict state and maybe being turned into flats, or is it a bit grim because it's a huge corporation that's taken that place of social meetings and interaction out of the community and turned it into something a bit horrible and a bit generic. So yeah, so I made this film where I kind of researched all of the UK restaurants and went to every one of them and did a drive-by and filmed them all. It's just in its final stages of being edited at the moment. And then yeah, I hope to release it on YouTube. So it'll probably get blocked because it's got loads of songs in the background, but I hope to release it soon so everyone can kind of see that.
Amazing. That sounds good. We'll keep us updated on that. And I'm going to move on to Faye now. I'm just conscious of time. But thank you very much, Sam. That was really interesting, seeing a bit of your work and hearing more about it. So Faye, your work is currently on show in the Digital Window Gallery. So that kicked off on the 15th of April and it closes this Sunday on the 9th of May. So yeah, if anyone wants to get down and check that out, it'll be open Thursday to Sunday this week. And you're showing a body of work that has 2 chapters. So Under the Yuzu Tree and Wood, Water, Rock, which explores interpretations of landscape both through like a personal perspective and different cultural perspectives. So yeah, I wondered, just to start off, could you tell us a bit more about the 2 chapters of the body of work and some of the ideas they explore?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because the 2 chapters, I mean, they work as a unity, like a whole body of work, obviously, but they are, because through the process of making, they sort of, I think my emphasis changed slightly a little bit. So the starting point was Under the Yuzu Tree. I think it was about 2016 when I started. So, and also the same time I started to do my PhD, and then so there were lots of quite research at the same time happening. So basically I was making some black and white photographs as well as we're going through some family photos, and was trying to making this connection between this imaginary landscape and emotion, and also the concept of memory, what is memory and what is not actually memory. And so there are some examples of, I'm just going to go it quickly now and we can come back to it later. So that's the sort of example of, I was sort of investigate landscape photographs of my own and also juxtaposed with my some family photos as well. So Wood Water Rock, which is the second chapter. So moving into that, I think it's a continuation of the first chapter, but I think I place more emphasis on I did quite a lot of research during the time on early material culture, both in Japanese and Chinese. So I find there are lots of interesting, say, decorative object like bonsai tree and stuff like that. And so these, I was really interested into these ideas of interior landscape in relation to the natural world, and because I think it's almost like embodiment, or it's a miniature of the natural world. When you look at those objects, the motifs are mostly about landscape. So in the second chapter, you can see a lot. I put a lot of more emphasis on the physicality of the work, and also the explorations of the material and the surfaces. I suppose, yeah. So the other thing I want to talk about a little bit about my connection to the landscape is, I think there is something, it can be quite cliche, but when we go back to Roland Barthes, think about these ideas of punctum from camera lucida and this inability to speak or define the photographic image. So I find that this most of the time is also unlocatable as well. And I find it also easily can be misunderstood as nostalgia, because I got quite lots of comments through when people seeing my work say, oh, it's very nostalgic and things like that. I got nothing to against it, to be honest. I like it. Because I mean, the way I work, I print with different paper. I mean, things do look, sometimes I use found images or print on worm-tongue paper intentionally. So they do look like old photographs and things. So I could see where the comments come from. But I think I'm more interested in these ideas of the imaginary past. So it's almost like an illusion for being in a landscape that have never existed, or a sense of a loss towards something has never actually happened. So I was trying to, I guess, understand or trying to investigate these ideas, why I'm so drawn to certain images and certain details triggered the sort of memory that never existed. And also sort of they are made of half reconstructed images from my own, or fragments from other found images as well. And also I suppose there is also a very heavy component of the research nature of the project. So I was basically looking into lots of existing scholarship and literature of this interaction between the landscape and emotion. So through the culture and historical as well as philosophical frameworks, and just looking into the interpretations or representations of landscape from East Asia, mainly Japanese and Chinese, as well as the European, the Greek tradition of petals. And another layer of this will be the translation between the different languages, as well as culture context, verbal or written versus visual as well. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's the sort of like summary of my work.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that idea of being like multiple layers of translation that you talk about. The visual, the linguistic, and the cultural. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I was just, we touched on this earlier when we spoke, but the idea of, one, where photography sits in this, but where the materials do as well. Obviously, there's a vast difference between how you intended to present this project initially to how it was pitched for the window to how it's ended up a year later after a lot of shifts in the project and in the scope of how it's presented.
Yeah, I think is that the question, right? Yeah.
Yeah, possibly badly worded, but yeah, I mean, yeah. So, yeah, what I am intrigued to sort of what are the differences now to where you were a year ago, but also how does photography function now compared to a year ago in terms of how you're presenting the practice?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting about this ideas of I have to say the work in progress, because actually, I mean, that's sort of echoes the ideas of the festival, and as well as my own practice, because I think the majority of my practice actually of my works, they never actually, I don't think there is a finished form for it, because I constantly changing like the work I submitted a year ago. I mean, I still work with those images, some of those images, and reprint them and to do different kind of things to them. So, and I think that's quite important, and also something to do with this specificity of the photographic media as well, because I find it fascinating because the reproduction ability, it's just really opening up lots of different possibilities as well, in terms of every time I can change the scale as different surfaces and process and presentation, frame or not frame it. So I mean, I can change it according to what I'm actually doing. For instance, exhibitions or digital space, it can be quite different, but essentially, I think it's always like a work in progress, and also it's nice to be able to do that, to just every time see the work evolve all the time, and not just like a finished work. Yeah.
Where the images are kind of, the images are there to present as a front or as a front for an idea. Does that, obviously, they're intended to be presented together or in series or in contrast with each other, and there's a relationship between those images. Are they always intended to be presented together as a pair, or is that because you mentioned how you frame things and the materials they're printed on, is that interchangeable ever, or is it always one intended narrative?
Yeah, I think it's really important, because people do ask me about this quite a lot, because of the nature, I mean, the reproduction ability of it. So you see, I see my work in sort of all different kind of presentation, and then I think it's quite flexible, I would say. I mean, I like the fluidity about it, and that's really, I think that's the way I work as well. And so when it's just decision making, and sometimes it doesn't have to be fixed. It's never have to be fixed. for instance, when I put them into the books, obviously there is a sequences. I mean, most of my work are in groups. I mean, that sort of things come naturally, I think. I mean, I didn't really think about it too much, but I work with group of images, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be in a fixed sequences or order. But I mean, when you put it in a book, obviously you have to have a sequences. So I made the decision according to this purpose. Like, for instance, I don't know, it's just a simple example like things like this. But then when I print them in exhibition place, I mean they can be, the relationship can change very differently, you know. I mean, so there isn't really a fixed a combinations of which and which, and sometimes it can be paired with this image and the other one, but the next occasion maybe it's just changed. Yeah.
Okay.
I really like that idea of like revisiting and it being like yeah, kind of like call and response, and how that interacts, because you publish like your work and you, there's a big focus on printing, but I think also in your digital window exhibition, I suppose how Declan has designed it kind of echoes that interaction as well. And yeah, I just wondered about like how you felt your ideas have translated to the digital screen.
Yeah, I mean, I find it's actually quite interesting. I see what, I mean, the loop video, because I didn't like, not like Sam's work, because I work in images and my work has been basically we collect these images of mine, and then Declan work on it on his own. But then the final product, I mean, I find it's really interesting because I don't usually see that. Normally you know, when I do exhibitions or I do book, I mean, I would be the one in charge. But actually I quite like this ideas of seeing how other people respond to it, because I rarely have the chance to do it. And also I think it's interesting to see the sequences. I mean, the choice he made and put which one to which one together and juxtapositions and things like that, because I think it's nice to play around with these ideas of, it's almost like poetry, you know, because I always see my work in that way. It's like poetry, read poetry between lines. So so that those images and then the juxtapositions and everything, it's very nice to see that, because it's not really, it doesn't have to be assigning to a specific meaning to them. So it's more, you can see the dialogue. It's really like just freely. I mean, they have this dialogue quite happen organically most of the time. So I find that's quite interesting. I kind of like the ideas of I wasn't actually in control of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Just one other thing I wanted to ask. I've got a lot of questions, but I'll put them on Discord later, rather than taking up all the time. But the other thing I wanted to ask was just a really practical question about how the work has shifted since last year. Because again, same as Sam, same as Monse, the application that came in February, March last year, I think it was for Under the Yuzu Tree, wasn't it? And then obviously a year later, your work's developed and it is Woodwater Rock. So I mean, was there a plan to develop that work in this time anyway, or has that work kind of developed because there's, you know, there is an end result or the exhibition at Open Eye to work towards?
I think the two projects that have been always kind of parallel to each other, and so I did have these problems of titling, because then essentially they were from the same project, and sort of like I had to separate them out, because I realized there's so many images literally and I do have to separate. That's for the practical part of it, but also I realized there is this shifts of the emphasizing, because I'm more now concerning and emphasizing on this materiality of it. So I do see the differences. I think that it's essential to separate them into two different chapters. And in terms of how the work develop, I think it's interesting to see how things develop, especially in this strange time, because I most of the time, I mean, in the past, I mean, I did explore quite lots of different printing techniques and stuff like that, but most of the things I think are heavily rely on the facility, which I struggle quite a lot, because when you don't have access to darkroom, obviously you can't really make silver gelatin print anymore. And then so I have to, so it's almost forced me to explore other printing techniques. I mean, I have been always interested in other, and I did some other prints, but then this is almost like, oh, I have to do other things, which is actually quite nice. Because then you see here, I mean, I did some quite recently, I did quite a lot of revisiting to the risograph. I mean, I did it before, but then I wasn't thinking about it for a while until quite recently during the festival. So I sort of went back to it and find it's really interesting to basically experiment with the gradations. You can see the images, I mean, right, and they're the same image, but then they're sort of playing around this idea of exploration, I mean, exposure and gradations, the contrast and stuff like that. So it does feels quite different. And also I find it's quite interesting to see that in relation to the ideas of doubling, which you can actually see from the very beginning of the first chapter. They sort of echoes each other, but at the same time, I mean, the techniques and surfaces slightly changed as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Faye. That was really interesting. I'm just going to move on to Monse now.
I'm gonna share.
Sometimes we keep any time, but I'm awful at that. So yeah, so Monse, your work is or will be shown on the Digital Window Gallery from the 13th of May until the end of the festival on the 6th of June. So you're showing a series called A Letter to My Selfie, which explores self-image and the idea of a kind of interaction between your virtual self and your kind of like real world self, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was really interested in how you talk about kind of using social media and photography as a tool for connection, particularly when you talked about moving to a new city when you moved to Liverpool. So I wondered if, just to begin with, you could tell us a bit about the role of photography in kind of this idea of like connecting with people, I guess.
Yeah, so when I moved to England, I knew it was going to be difficult to make friends. So I would just join some Facebook groups, and I just realized that there was a big film photography community, and that kind of encouraged me to buy an analog camera, to buy film, and just go outside. Go outside. Talk to people in the street, have lovely conversations sometimes, be at the party, talk to people again. And I don't know, it just enforced relationships for me. Not really friendships, but it was just nice to make connections. Yeah, it really helped.
And also, I suppose when you move somewhere new, you kind of feel like part of the city and start to get familiar with places and that kind of thing. Yeah, because you photographed some kind of like well-known places around Liverpool, like Bowl Street and that kind of.
So sorry, I'm very nervous. Should we talk about I mean, yeah, this is another part of it. I would download apps as well to make friends, and that would be a good start of a conversation, just like compliment other people's work. And yeah, I just kept going because of that as well. It was very fun, and yeah.
I mean, the title of the original work, Letter to My Selfie, obviously alluding to, you know, the connection or the disparity between the real you and the virtual you. I just wondered if you could kind of talk a little bit about how that's explored in the work, and also, I guess, how important that is to you in relation to the answer to the last question about moving to a new home and sort of integrating and getting to know people and creating new work in that setting where you are, you know, I guess in a practical sense, virtual you, but emotionally experiencing that as yourself.
Yeah, for me it was important to know, to know the difference, to see how I interact with people on social media, because I am myself on my social media, but at the same time I kind of take this role of performance where I emphasize some sides of me where I'm more creative or I'm funnier. So for me and my mental health and my relationship with social media, it was very important to know that difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the image as part of that collage top left. Every time I look at that, I think it's really kind of it's quite. I don't know what the word defining or sort of your work in the large analog digital crossover, where you kind of don't know where one image starts and one image ends. You know, even just looking at the physicality of that top left image, I should have asked you this earlier, but I'm still not clear whether "Wish You Were Here" is a poster that's on the wall, or whether that is or whether that's part of the collage. And it's kind of that. Where's that line drawn between the medium of photography and the medium of image collage?
Sorry, I don't understand.
Sorry. Just where does one image stop being a photograph and start being a collaged image?
I don't know.
I think like that is lovely though as well, Monse, how you express being between two places.
Yeah.
Like I think in the previous Patrick's right, I wasn't sure if that poster on the wall was like a digital element or part of the photograph.
Yeah, I guess it's because, I mean, that's a digital image. Both of them are digital. So I guess because it's not like an analog photograph like this one, it's very difficult to see that. And that's why I wanted to use analog most of the time, but for different reasons I couldn't. But I still don't feel guilty by modifying or editing digital images to make them look analog, because I think digital is for that to be modified. It's easier than modify analog photography. So I guess that's why you can't really tell if it's a poster, but of course that's part of a bar in Liverpool. So I thought it was quite obvious that it was that place. No.
I don't know if it's a question, but yeah, with these images, I love like this idea that you capture of like being between two places. And that kind of being in transit and constantly kind of connecting between your online self and your virtual self.
Yeah. For me, the analog photography kind of represents myself, because analog is very raw and pure for me. And the process that I go through whenever I scan those photos are very personal, because I scan them myself and I enjoy that moment. It's my moment. And the digital elements that you see here, they kind of represent, my interactions. And I just try to, I didn't make this project for other people. At the beginning, it was just for me, for myself in the future. And I knew that what I wanted to feel whenever I saw this project is feel melancholic, I'm very sentimental. I use melancholy as a source of creativity. So yeah, I like the contrast with the analog and the digital elements.
Yeah, that image on the bottom right as well is just like so familiar, isn't it? When you're places, and then
Yeah.
rain and oil on the pavement as well. You're back in Liverpool. Yes, what was my next question? Yeah, you submitted a letter to myself originally like a year ago, and that's the series that you're showing on the Digital Window Gallery. But you've also been working on a video piece as part of Independence Biennial, Too Foreign it's called.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to
So basically they are part of the same story, but just in different. If this is like a time of line, a letter to myself, it would be like the beginning, right? Like where you get used to your new house and you embrace it and you're starting to have fun, and yeah, that's your new house. But then with the COVID situation, I had to go back home, and that's when I really felt that pressure of me having to go back home and be a local again, and not being an expat, an immigrant that I kind of enjoyed here. I mean, I struggled, but I enjoyed it. So it's part of the same story in just different times, and I can show it.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see it.
Can still see the images you were showing. You might stop share and like reshare again.
Yeah. I'm just gonna try to. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why you never suppose, oh, how could you? I have to be here too, you know. Where'd you go? I hear nothing before.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can't wait to see that in full when it's ready.
You haven't seen it?
Yes, that'd be great. So yeah, I know we've had some comments on Discord and maybe a few questions as well. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to say thank you to everybody, to like our speakers and everyone who joined the discussion. And yeah, we'll be on Discord now for about like 15-20 minutes, so you can ask questions there, and we'll follow up on any questions that we didn't have time to cover with my bad timekeeping skills. But also just wanted to mention that each artist has done an Instagram takeover on OpenEye Gallery's Instagram, so just at OpenEye Gallery. So Sam and Faye, you've already done yours, and Monse, yours is coming up. So you can check out more of their work there, and also on the Independence Biennial website, which is independencebiennial.com. But yeah, Patrick, did you want to add anything before we go, or?
No, I'll carry on Discord. I've got a few notes that I kind of want to pick up on, and just things that I didn't want to kind of ask because they might have taken 10 minutes to talk about. So yeah, I'll pick up on that.
Great. So we'll see you Discord. I'm doing a weird echo sound. And yeah, thank you very much, everybody. And thank you for your time to our speakers.
Thank you.
Cheers.